James Toney, phew, you know, I couldn't see a way to beat James Toney. No, that's just, you can't beat guys like that.
Ladies and gentlemen, boxing has always been more than a sport. It's blood, sweat, pride, and pure ego. Some fighters fight for glory, some fight for money. But James Toney, he fought for respect. Toney wasn't just a fighter, he was a throwback, a real warrior who didn't care about politics, promoters, or public opinion.
What's your hardest fight?
Myself. With myself. Good. I was so good.
And one thing that defined James Lights Out Toney was his hatred. Hatred for certain fighters, hatred for fakes, hatred for pretenders, and hatred for anyone who dared to stand in his way. Today, we're diving deep into the top 6 boxers James Toney hated the most. Not just a list, but the history, the trash talk, the bad blood, and the brutal truth. So sit back, because this is not just boxing history. This is the story of grudges, rivalries, and pure animosity from one of boxing's most ruthless warriors. Boxer number 6, Roy Jones Jr. Jones and Toney met in 1994. Jones was the flashiest fighter of his era, while Toney was the gritty technician. Why the hate? Toney believed Jones ducked him for years before finally fighting. When they did fight, Toney was drained at the weight and Jones dominated, handing Toney his first pro loss. Toney always claimed he wasn't 100% and carried bitterness toward Jones for getting away with it. Toney once said, "Roy Jones was scared of me in my prime. He never wanted a rematch." Legacy of the rivalry? Even decades later, Toney would bring up Jones, calling him overrated and protected.
Boxer number 5, Bernard Hopkins. Hopkins was a master tactician and defensive genius. Why the hate? Toney and Hopkins were constantly compared as defensive masterminds. They trash-talked for years but never fought. Toney accused Hopkins of being boring, saying, "Nobody wants to see that man hug for 12 rounds." Hopkins, on the other hand, claimed Toney was undisciplined and overweight. Their rivalry was more verbal than physical, but it burned for decades. Boxer number 4, Evander Holyfield. In 2003, Toney moved up to heavyweight and fought the legendary Evander Holyfield. Why the hate? Before the fight, Holyfield dismissed Toney, saying he was too small and not a real heavyweight. Toney took this personally and punished Holyfield in the ring, stopping him in a one-sided beating. After the fight, Toney gloated, saying, "I retired him. I sent him home. That's what happens when you disrespect James Toney." It wasn't hatred that started outside the ring, it was inside it. Toney hated the way Holyfield underestimated him. Boxer number 3, John Ruiz.
You hug me, you're gonna go sleep early. Be a man, fight. Don't hug me, fight. I talk when I sleep.
It's a talker, you know what I mean?
Ruiz was the WBA heavyweight champion, known for his awkward holding style. Why the hate? Toney hated Ruiz's style, calling it garbage boxing. When they fought in 2005, Toney won convincingly, but later tested positive for steroids, and the win was overturned. Ruiz mocked Toney after that scandal, and Toney never forgave him. Toney's words, "John Ruiz is the worst heavyweight champion in history, a disgrace to boxing." Boxer number 2, Hasim Rahman. Toney fought Rahman in 2006 for the WBC heavyweight title. Why the hate? Rahman was outspoken and their press conferences were pure chaos. Both fighters traded insults about weight, skills, and even personal lives. The fight ended in a controversial draw which only fueled the fire. Toney quote, "Hasim Rahman is a bum. He don't belong in the ring with me." Rahman, meanwhile, would call Toney fat boy and mock his training habits. Their feud was as much about ego as boxing. Boxer number 1, Mike McCallum. McCallum, the body snatcher, fought Toney 3 times in the 1990s. Why the hate? Their trilogy was one of the best technical series in boxing history. McCallum gave Toney absolute wars, pushing him to the limit every time. Toney respected him as a fighter, but hated him as a rival.
After years of fighting, Toney admitted McCallum was one of the toughest men he ever faced, but his bitterness came from the fact that McCallum made him look human. Toney said, "I don't like Mike McCallum. He took years off my career." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of James Toney's top 6 hatreds in boxing. But here's the truth. Behind every insult, behind every grudge, behind every ounce of hatred was James Toney's love for the fight. Because hatred was his fuel, hatred was his motivation, and hatred made him great. James Lights Out Toney wasn't just a champion in multiple weight classes. He was a gladiator, a man who fought anyone, anywhere, anytime. Some say his mouth was bigger than his fists, but if you watched him fight, you know his fists told the real story. So the next time you hear Toney trashing Roy Jones, Bernard Hopkins, Evander Holyfield, John Ruiz, Hassan Rahman, or Mike McCallum, remember this. It wasn't just trash talk. It was the essence of James Toney, a fighter who turned hatred into history.